Welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, another one of our friends hadn't been around a while, but he's busy. He's doing that grad school thing. But thrilled to have him back. Daniel Chang Contreras, how are you, my friend? Good to talk to you again.
Oh, I'm doing great, Andrew. Thank you very much for having me.
Thrilled to have you. I reached out to you and hunted you down because I wanted to talk about something. Look, we're going into an election cycle. The election cycle has a little side narrative that's been going for a while about Spanish speaking voters. The way they're changing, the demographic is changing. The Republicans have made some gains, especially places like South Florida, the Rio Grande Valley. People are talking about these sorts of gains and changes. We saw the demographics from the census. We know this is not only the fastest growing demographic in America, it's also diversifying demographic in America, which is an important point to point out too.
Yeah.
Spanish speaking media in America has never been bigger. But then when I actually look at it and I listen to it, and I don't speak the language, you do, so you help me out here. When I translate it and try to understand it, it's amazing to me that these are a lot of the same folks, but it's covered differently, the point of views differently. It's almost like a whole different world, even though a lot of these news organizations have the same parent companies. There's a disconnect there. Walk people through that a little bit, because I think we're talking about Spanish speaking folks and how they're becoming a force in politics. But when they're talking amongst themselves in media that's for them, it's almost like a parallel world, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the thing about the challenge, I would say, to understand Spanish-speaking markets and Spanish-speaking voters, of course, it's that I mean, the only thing that we have in common is we speak Spanish. But other than that, it's a very diverse and very different perspectives, and that, of course, shows when you look at the major, Spanish speaking networks. When you take, of course, the usual Univision, Telemundo, which tend to be more left leaning, you see that disconnect, and you also see how the attempt sometimes of English speaking people to try to impose their narrative of ways of seeing things. When they try to do that in Univision, in Telemundo, or in other media, it doesn't necessarily resonate in the same way, because when we talk about Spanish in Spanish media outlets, there's a lot of subcultures, there's a lot of societal, cultural cues, basically, that don't resonate. That when you try to import just English speaking media news, just doesn't resonate, right? You're trying to talk about it with Cuban American community in South Florida, the Venezuelan American community in Texas, or the Mexican American community in California. You need to understand that little societal context to actually how they think and actually how they process news.
Yeah, and Daniel Chan Contreras joining us. I don't want to gloss over it because you just hit on it. There's so much diversity in the Spanish speaking community. Look, even somebody like me, we can sit on paper and look, oh, well, a Venezuelan refugee that's speaking Spanish and a Cuban refugee or the diaspora that's in South, you would think they would have a lot in common, but just because they both are fleeing dictatorships, they have a lot of cultural differences. So communicating to them, even though they have a similar background coming to America, very, very different way to reach out to those communities. And I'm just picking those two. You could pick any other country you want it. Look, we're going to have more and more folks coming out of Mexico with the violence there. Somebody from Colombia isn't going to be the same as Argentina, even though they, to an outsider like us, those would be more similar. That's really where the challenges start coming in, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, that's 100% correct. And I think that's one of the issues that I think in general, English speaking media and English speaking political analysts and whatnot have improved a little bit. I mean, every time I hear, at least they say, well, it's different. They're not all the same, which I think is important. But yeah, I mean, it is 100% a challenge. And when you see on the Spanish media outlets and the way that they talk about any news, it's different than in English speaking outlets. Also, there's a lot more emphasis on, well, at least right now, because we're not necessarily 100% in election mode right now. We'll be there like in a while. Although the news media cycle is a little bit slower right now, because there's not an impending election right now. You can see the differences, especially on the topics they cover. Even when you talk about non-political things like entertainment, sports, it's completely different. I mean, we talk about football, well, soccer, not American football, or not American football. I'm gonna lie in that one.
Daniel Chang Contreras joining us. That's an important point, because I think something that gets lost. Look, I've been doing this politics things for a little while now. When you talk about outreach to a group, they just don't want constant politics. That's why we call our show Culture and Politics. You got to mix it up a little bit. People just get numb. I imagine it's the same thing in the Spanish speaking media, but especially for those English outlets or English minority candidates that are trying to do quote unquote outreach. If you don't mix in some of that culture stuff, if you don't look, I've lived in a foreign country before a couple times. You got to give them a little something to show you care, right? You got to give them a little cultural thing. You don't have to speak the language, but you better throw a word or two in there somewhere to show you're trying. That kind of stuff. You can't just show up at political time with just a political message. That ain't going to work. You got to mix in some of that culture stuff. You got to show some effort in there too, right?
Man, yeah, they're 100% correct. You need to understand the cultural side. Guess cultural it's important politics because if you want at the end of the day when you're going to vote, you want to have someone that understands you, that at least talks the same way you do, like understands your not only policy struggles but also just the way you interact. You want to have someone relatable, and culture and sports is really important. And actually, this is really important. I would say it's completely non-political, but a good and interesting way of seeing the difference between Spanish-speaking media and Anglo media. Is just in the way that I don't know if you have heard, like this was a whole thing over Shakira and her former whatever. Well, the whole thing, I mean, it's just annoying to me, but it was a huge deal in every single Spanish-speaking media outlet and social media, and just hearing my parents talk about that constantly. And it was a huge news for like 2 weeks, 2 whole weeks. It's annoying, but it was a huge thing. I mean, everyone was talking about it, and every single media outlet was talking about it. It's Spanish speaking, but you go to maybe English speaking, it's not the same relevance because it's just not the same. You don't have. I mean, regular New York Times reader will not care that much about whatever going on with Shakira and Piqué, but a reader from Miami or Houston that probably will.
Right, Daniel Chang Contreras. It's interesting you bring that up because it brings up one of the oldest parts of this when it comes to North and South America and Europe. He's a Spanish soccer star. He's a big-time Spanish soccer star. So there's always been this thing, and you explain it better than I am. I'm not going to get too far into it. You wait as far as you want to go. Spanish, the language, the folks in Spain get a little touchy about such things. The folks in South America, the folks in Mexico, that's a real thing. But that was one of the things that, all of a sudden, both sides of the Atlantic, they were talking about the same thing. But that's why, because he was such a huge soccer star. And of course, it's Shakira. Who doesn't want to talk about Shakira? But that was one of those things. You want to talk about checking off all the boxes for a language group. That one did it.
Well, yeah, I mean, 100%. And you talk about it. That's an interesting point. Of course, Spain is very different, European country, different history and whatnot. But we do share a lot of societal and cultural zeitgeist and cultural issues. Latin America, Hispanic American, and Spain, music, sports wise. Sometimes even like the politics of it, you hear it, and you can see some echoes between the Spain and the new world. So that's a very interesting point, and actually, that now that you brought it up, that even if just completely different societal context and economic context and political context, the mere fact that we speak the same language brings some common things. Well, it's like American and the Brits, I'm pretty sure as well, right?
I'm sure it is too. Daniel Chang Contreras. All right, you do international affairs and foreign policy. When we talk about immigration in America, I think most Americans make one big mistake, and the media is really bad about this. We get really myopic about it. It's almost like the immigration problem starts at the border and then comes inward. We don't do a great job of talking about all the chains of events from the border outwards to all these other countries that are affecting this. The new policies that are being discussed and debated, a lot of them are starting to shift the focus. We know President Trump kind of started this train with the hold in Mexico policy, trying to keep the people coming from South America and Central America in Mexico, the Biden. We can debate all that stuff. I think that's one of the big holes here is we're acting like we can just hold the wall like it's the Alamo and nothing's going to happen. And that's not how this works. This is a bigger problem than just our borders and just trying to treat it like it's just something we're going to fix in and of ourselves. We're going to be in a doom loop on this thing, aren't we?
I mean, yes. One of the big points is that this migration wave crisis, especially the parole program that's been all around the news, or doing the rounds, it's not the same type of migration that America has been used over the last 30 years, right? Usually, you talk about Mexico, you talk about Central American countries like Honduras, like Guatemala, like El Salvador, people fleeing violence. But now we're talking about like this 30,000 per month program, which is now on the courts, and there's a lawsuit. It's Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, and Haiti, right? With the exception of Haiti. Haiti's a bit of a different kind of worms. Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua have kind of the same issue, right? Is you have a communist or socialist dictatorship that has created an immense amount of political, social, and economic pain in their countries, and people just fleeing. And the United States is just now at the end of receiving that migration flow. So it is a different policy context. It is a different political solution, of course, to this specific border problem than the ones we faced 15 to 20 years ago. And it's important for policymakers to take that into account. The problem is, I think, is that we're not, I mean, Americans are not taking that into account. There's not a real policy decision, a rational, coherent policy decision. It's just President Biden trying to do something halfway, then the court saying that he can't do it, and then we have some way in the middle where the program is not implemented, but it's not also completely eliminated, and just leave a lot of people in the south, in the border towns, and the migrants just up in the air.
Yeah, Daniel Chang Contreras. This goes back to what we started talking about with the Spanish-speaking media, though. When you talk to these migrants, when you see the foreign Spanish-speaking press elsewhere, they all say the border is open. But the reason they're saying that, that's not coming at it. Look, things don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in a sequence. The sequence of events is the dialogue, and we've got this now. There's reporting on this. This is mainstream stuff when you get south of the border. They're hearing it, and then all the Americans are going, well, no, the border's not open. Our discourse on it, even if you're just saying our border is open against the policies of the current government as a conservative or whatever, saying our borders are open, when that gets to the Spanish-speaking media and overseas media for other people groups as well, all they heard is the border is open part. They didn't hear the part about it being an outer. So whether it's President Biden saying it in his campaigning or somebody against the border policies saying the border's open, that's the message that those folks are getting. So when they're saying we're told the border is open, they're telling you the truth. It goes back to that media and the language change and how things are covered, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, and there's a couple of things I would like to add. I mean, you're 100% right. And there's a couple of things. First, of course, people also, have relatives, and they know people who cross the border, and they know people who did the trip, and they know people who tried with the coyotes and all that kind of stuff. And they'll say, well, once you get here, you can do whatever you want. And the word of mouth spreads. Even if Kamala Harris goes to Guatemala and says, do not come, whatever. If you have a friend that actually went there, you'll say, well, you know what, I'll try. I'll take the risks. That's one thing. And the other thing important as well is that this is there's an increasing sense within Hispanic America. At least I will tell Venezuela, right, which is the realm we have some experience on. We also consume a lot of American media, right? A lot of Venezuelans speak English. A lot of journalists speak English, so they consume American media both from the right and from the left, I would say, in a regular basis. And that also shapes the way you write about these type of stories, right? So when Fox News and when CNN says, well, the border is open or the border is not open or whatever, that's not only being heard in America, but it's also being heard in Latin America. It's also been heard in Venezuela. It's also been heard in other countries where people sometimes have access to this type of media, especially through social media. They speak English, and they can. That also shapes their opinions and say, well, that's how the way they're thinking, that's the way they are talking about, and that's what we'll report it, and we'll talk about it here. So that's a really an interesting point. That's not only Anglo media. It's of course the main target audience is of course Americans, but it's also this type of peripheral audience that understands English, and that shapes the way we talk about American politics and when we talk about American policy, which is in this case the most important.
Yeah, Daniel Chang Contreras. We're coming up on this political season. We've already mentioned it briefly. How is this going to get covered by the Spanish speaking media? And again, it's very diverse because all these different countries are going to have their own different spins on it. They've all, Venezuela media is going to have a very distinctive look on it compared to Colombia media or whoever because of the political situation.
Yeah.
When they start covering our election cycle from the outside, what are they focusing on? Because they're probably not real deep into the partisanship and the parties and all that stuff. They're probably onto the bigger picture ideas. What's a couple of the top line things that Spanish media from outside the country is going to be covering that's going to filter through those relatives and filter through the folks that are here that might actually be voting? Because look, y'all talk to family just like everybody else does, right? They're going to talk. Word of mouth is more powerful than any media that's ever been invented yet, because basically that's what social media is, right? It's word of mouth. What's a couple of the top line items that they're going to be covering kind of from the outside that might actually trickle back in here?
Well, as you said, rightfully, foreign media will not, of course, know all the details and all the specifics and the mechanics about American politics. So what they'll try and what they usually do is to go a little bit with the, I won't say caricatures, with a little bit of the stereotypes in both parties. Like, well, the Republicans believe this, the Democrats believe this, because that's like common knowledge or like the popular image. So that's what they'll transmit back home. Of course, they'll talk a lot of foreign policy. Well, that depends, of course, in each country. I'm sure there's some countries that will care a bit more about the foreign policy part of the candidates and the parties than others. But I'm not gonna lie. One of the big issues right now, and that's at least how it was the 2020, 2016 covered, is, of course, if Trump's gonna run or not. Trump, it's a media personality that transcends, I would say, language barriers. It's a very interesting story. So a lot of media outlets will try to cover that. If he ends up being the nominee in 2024, it's gonna be, Biden Trump rematches. He's gonna be more like in a personality type of narrative. If Trump's not the nominee, then probably I'll say they'll go more to the, Republicans, and they add all the like stereotypes of Republicans, or like not stereotypes, because they're not completely true, and Democrats, all these stereotypes, again, not completely true, and just present that to the people back home.
Yeah, Daniel Chang Contreras. All right, let's go the other direction on this. We already know that they've got so much campaign money on these presidential races now, they literally can't spend it all on advertising. There's going to be a lot of people making a lot of money on Hispanic outreach, quote unquote, Hispanic outreach. What's actually effective and what's not when it comes to commercial, TV spots, whatever? A lot of people are going to talk about it like a buzzword. Practically, when you sit down to the TV and actually see it, or the web app or whatever, what actually works, what actually cuts through, and what is going to come off as an actual outreach chance, and not just, oh, they're just trying to get us to vote for them, because that's the same problem no matter what language you do it in, right?
Well, I mean, yes, I'm not an expert in campaign messaging yet. Hopefully, maybe in the future I'll be, and we'll talk about it. But what I would say in like general rule of thumb, of course, is that the people who write the ad, the people who produce the ad, they know the culture they're talking about. I mean, they know the target audience that they're talking about. They actually have some real grassroots connections with it. They talk the way Cuban Americans talk, in like it's like second nature. Basically, they really understand that culture. So Cuban American, Venezuelan Americans, Mexican Americans, whatever. What tell you, right? And so people don't get it like cringe, right? Well, one of the worst things you can do is like when you watch a Democratic presidential debate and see the typical random presidential candidate trying to speak Spanish, which just becomes awful and just cringe. Well, don't do that ever again. That's one of the things. But I think that some people are doing really good jobs. I know Giancarlo Sopo, who's a conservative strategist for Hispanic. He does terrific jobs because he does that, right? He talks. He knows the people he's talking about, he's talking to, and talks in the way that goes to their cultural issues and their cultural gigs and cues, and that way it resonates.
Yeah, we talk about things like kitchen table issues, right? Like basic stuff. Does a lot of that translate pretty much one for one? I would imagine it does. Things like, your job, your kids' education, better life, fuel prices, food prices. I would imagine that stuff all translates. There's probably some cultural ways to discuss it specifically. But when we talk about kitchen table issues in politics and retail politics, a lot of the principles are probably pretty close, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's yeah. I mean, when gas is up, you can say it in 1,000 languages. It's the same thing. Gas is up, right? Because your bank account goes down, and those type of issues that go pretty much the same. The way you package them maybe a bit different. You can use some words and some specific things that resonate a little bit more. But yeah, kitchen table issues to pretty much. I think that's one thing that's pretty much universal. Prices go up and people get really mad, and I mean that's just human nature. That's traditional retail policy. There.
Yeah, that decimal point is a universal language. Everybody knows when you start putting zeros behind it, what that means, right?
Exactly.
Daniel Chang Contreras, always enjoy the conversation, my friend. Appreciate the insight. Let folks know what you got going on. It's been a little while since we've seen you. Update them all. Let them know where to find you, follow you, and keep up with you until we get you back on Herd Tell again, my friend.
Yeah, of course. Well, you guys can follow me on Twitter, Daniel E Chang C. Right now, I've been doing some videos for Lost Debate, which is social media outlet that talks about important issues right now, and tries to go a little bit beyond, the partisan lenses and the partisan framing. And it's been great. I'll do some videos for them every week. Just go there, follow them, follow me, and see you soon, Andrew.
Yeah, it's another one of our great Young Voices contributor. Always appreciate chatting with him. Daniel Chang Contreras. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Andrew.